Have you ever stopped caring? Not just about the big things, but about everything. Your marriage, your children, your own soul. What happens when a man just gives up, not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left but silence and regret? Throughout the 1800s, in the industrial heart of Turin, Italy, thousands of families were breaking apart under the weight of poverty, disease, and despair. Men walked away. Women grew cold, children were abandoned. And in the middle of all this human wreckage stood one priest who could see what others couldn't, Don Bosco, Giovanni Melchiorre Bosco. Born August 16th, 1815, in Becci, a tiny hamlet outside Turin where wolves still came down from the mountains in winter. By 1841, he was ordained. By 1844, he'd opened his first oratory for street boys in the Valdocco district, a neighborhood so rough that police wouldn't enter it after dark. But John Bosco had a gift nobody talked about in public. He saw things. Dreams that weren't dreams. Visions that pulled back the curtain between this world and the next. And what he saw terrified him so much that he spent 50 years trying to warn people before it was too late. This story involves a husband, a father, a man who didn't commit any dramatic sin. He just stopped trying. And what Don Bosco saw happen to his soul is something you need to hear. If you value documented Catholic history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the original biographical collection, Biographical Memoirs of Saint John Bosco, compiled by Father Giovanni Battista Lemoyne between 1898 and 1939, a 19-volume work that contains first-hand testimonies from people who lived with Don Bosco daily, including Father Michael Rua, who served as his secretary for 38 years and recorded conversations within hours of them happening. These aren't legend. These are documented accounts, cross-referenced with sacramental records from the Archdiocese of Turin. Now back to the information. The year was 1862. Turin was exploding. Population had doubled in 20 years. Factories were rising along the Po River. Cholera had killed 4,000 people just 9 years earlier. The city was desperate, violent, and hungry. A woman came to the oratory. She was in her 40s, thin, worn down. Her name wasn't recorded in the primary documents, only her husband's occupation. He worked in one of the textile mills near Porta Palazzo, 16-hour shifts, 6 days a week, wages that barely covered bread. She asked to speak with Don Bosco privately. When they sat down in the small office next to the chapel, she didn't cry. She just stared at her hands and said her husband had stopped talking to her 3 years ago. Not from anger, just silence. He came home, he ate, he slept, he went back to work. But he didn't look at her anymore, didn't ask about the children, didn't pray, didn't go to Mass, didn't care if the roof leaked or if there was food or if their youngest daughter was coughing blood. She said he wasn't cruel, he wasn't violent, he just wasn't there. Like something inside him had burned out, and all that was left was a body going through motions. Don Bosco asked when it started. She said, exactly 3 years ago, in May of 1859, their son had died. 7 years old, fever, 3 days. The boy had asked for his father on the last night, but her husband was at the mill. By the time he got home, the child was cold. Don Bosco asked if the man blamed himself. She said no, he didn't blame anyone. He didn't feel anything. That was the problem. After the funeral, he just stopped caring, stopped trying, stopped being a husband or a father or even a man, just a machine that worked and slept. She begged Don Bosco to visit him, to talk to him, to do something before it was too late. Don Bosco agreed. He took the address. A tenement building near Via Milano, 4th floor. He said he would go the next morning, but that night, Don Bosco had a dream. That's what he called them, dreams. Though everyone who lived with him knew they were something else, Father Rua recorded dozens of them. Father Julius Barbarus, who lived in the oratory from 1863 until Don Bosco's death in 1888, wrote that these dreams came with a physical intensity that left Don Bosco pale and shaking. He would wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes unable to speak for an hour. The dream that night showed Don Bosco a narrow street he recognized, Via Milano, 4th floor window, a man sitting on the edge of a bed, shoulders slumped, face blank. But around him, Don Bosco saw something else, shadows. Not shadows from objects, shadows with weight, with presence. They pressed against the man's chest, his shoulders, his head, not attacking him, just sitting on him, crushing him slowly under their mass. Don Bosco tried to approach the man in the dream, but a voice stopped him. Clear, definite, not harsh, but absolute. The voice said, "He chose this. Every morning he wakes and chooses it again. Every night he lays down and chooses it again. He is not forced, he is not tricked. He simply does not want to carry the weight anymore, so he is setting it down. And when you set down your cross, something else picks it up." Don Bosco looked again at the shadows. They weren't demons, they were just absence. The absence of love, the absence of effort, the absence of hope. An absence has weight. It crushes just as surely as iron. The voice continued. He will die in 11 days. His heart will stop while he sleeps. It will not hurt. But where he goes will hurt forever because he walked there freely, one choice at a time, until he was too far in to find the way. Back! Don Bosco woke up. It was 3 a.m. He dressed immediately. He walked through the dark streets to Via Milano, climbed 4 flights, knocked. The woman opened the door, shocked to see a priest at that hour. Don Bosco asked to speak with her husband. Now, immediately. It couldn't wait. The man was asleep. She woke him. He came to the small kitchen area, confused, annoyed. Don Bosco didn't ease into it. He said, You're going to die in 11 days. Your heart will stop. And if you die the way you're living now, you will be lost. The man stared at him. No expression. Then he said, Good. Don Bosco stood up. He put both hands on the man's shoulders and said, You think you've given up on God, but you haven't. You've given up on yourself. And that's worse, because God is still reaching for you. You're the one who won't reach back. The man pulled away. He said, I don't care. Don Bosco said, I know. That's the problem. You've made not caring into a choice. Every day you choose it, and every day it gets easier. And now you're so good at not caring that you can't even feel how much it's killing you. The man said nothing. Don Bosco left. He told the woman to bring her husband to confession within the week. She promised to try. 6 days passed. The man didn't come. Don Bosco went back to the tenement. The woman said her husband refused. He said priests were liars and dreams were nonsense, and he'd be fine. Don Bosco asked to speak with him again. The man wouldn't come out of the bedroom. Don Bosco shouted through the door, You have 5 days. 5 days to decide if you want to be a soul or a stone. If you choose stone, you'll get your wish. You'll feel nothing, forever, and that's hell, not fire. Not demons, just nothing, forever. No response. Don Bosco left. 4 more days passed. On the 10th day, a boy from the neighborhood ran to the oratory. He said the man had collapsed at the mill. They'd carried him home. He was unconscious, breathing but barely. Don Bosco grabbed his stole and oils and ran. When he arrived, the man was on the bed, eyes closed, skin gray, breathing shallow and irregular. Don Bosco leaned close and whispered in his ear, You can still choose. Right now, even now. Squeeze my hand if you're sorry. Squeeze my hand if you want God. Nothing. The man's hand lay limp. Don Bosco stayed there for 3 hours, whispering prayers, begging, pleading. The man's wife and children were in the corner, crying. Don Bosco kept whispering, Squeeze my hand, just once. Show me you want to try. At 7 p.m, the man's breathing stopped. His heart stopped. His hand never moved. Don Bosco stood up. He looked at the family and said, Pray for him. Don't stop. Ever. Because he's going to need it. The funeral was 2 days later. Small. Quiet. The man was buried in the common section of the city cemetery, the part reserved for the poor, where crosses were wooden and names faded in the rain. Don Bosco said the Mass. He didn't preach, he just prayed. But 3 nights later, Don Bosco had another dream. This one was worse. He saw the man standing in a place with no light and no darkness, just gray, endless gray. He wasn't burning, he wasn't screaming. He was just standing there, alone. And the worst part wasn't the isolation, it was the look on his face. He finally cared. He finally felt something. He finally wanted something. But it was too late. He was reaching out, but there was nothing to grab. He was shouting, but no sound came. He was trying to move, but his feet wouldn't lift. Don Bosco watched as the man realized where he was, watched as the full weight of every choice, every morning he'd chosen silence, every night he'd chosen absence, came crashing into him all at once. The man looked at Don Bosco in the dream. And Don Bosco saw in his eyes the most terrible thing a human can experience. Regret without remedy. Desire without hope. Love without an object. The man mouthed words. Don Bosco couldn't hear them, but he could read the lips. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't think it counted. I didn't think not choosing was the same as choosing. Then the gray closed in, and the man was gone. Don Bosco woke up. Father Rua was sleeping in the next room. He heard Don Bosco crying and came in. He asked what happened. Don Bosco told him everything. Father Rua wrote it down that morning, April 13th, 1862. The account sits in volume 6 of the biographical memoirs, pages 371 through 379. If you value documented Catholic history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the information. For the next 26 years, until his death on January 31st, 1888, Don Bosco told this story to thousands of young men who passed through his oratories. He told it to factory workers, to street boys, to seminarians, to wealthy benefactors who thought sin was only about what you did, not what you failed to do. He would say, You think hell is for murderers and thieves? But I've seen souls lost for nothing more than giving up, for stopping, for choosing not to care. Because when you choose not to care, you're not choosing nothing. You're choosing something. You're choosing the absence of love, and absence is still a choice, and choices have destinations. The oratory at Valdoco grew year by year. By 1863, 300 boys were living there permanently. By 1870, over 800. They came from everywhere, from the slums along the Dora River, where typhus killed 1 in 4 children, from the silk factories where 12-year-olds worked 14-hour shifts for pennies, from the rail yards where boys lost fingers and hands and sometimes died under the wheels of cargo cars. Don Bosco saw them all, fed them, taught them, trained them, kept them off the streets and out of prison. But more than that, he saw their souls. He saw which ones were struggling, which ones were giving up, which ones were sliding toward the gray place he'd seen in his dreams. In 1864, a boy named Carlo arrived, 15 years old. His father had abandoned the family when Carlo was 8. His mother had died of pneumonia when he was 12. Carlo had been living on the streets, stealing food, sleeping in abandoned buildings. He was thin, angry, and completely shut down. He didn't trust anyone, didn't talk to anyone, just existed. Don Bosco took him in, gave him a bed, gave him food, gave him work in the carpentry shop. But Carlo wouldn't engage, wouldn't smile, wouldn't pray. He did what he was told, but there was no life in it, just mechanical compliance. Don Bosco watched him for 3 months. Then one night in December he had a dream. He saw Carlo standing on the edge of a cliff. Not a physical cliff, a spiritual one. Below him was the same gray place Don Bosco had seen before. And Carlo was leaning forward, not jumping, just leaning, testing the edge, seeing how far he could go before he fell. Don Bosco woke up and went straight to the dormitory. It was 2 a.m. He found Carlo's bed. The boy was awake, staring at the ceiling. Don Bosco sat down on the edge of the bed and said, "You're close to the edge. I can see it. And if you go over, I can't pull you back. Only you can step away. But you have to choose to step away. And you have to choose it now." Carlo turned his head, looked at Don Bosco, and for the first time in months there was something in his eyes. Fear. Not of Don Bosco. Fear of himself. Fear of where he was heading. He said, "I don't know how to step away." Don Bosco said, "Yes, you do. You just have to want to. Even a little bit. Even the smallest desire to try is enough. God can work with desire. He can't work with nothing." Carlo sat up. He was shaking. He said, "What if I don't want to?" Don Bosco said, "Then you're already falling, and soon you won't be able to remember what wanting felt like." That sentence broke something in Carlo. He started crying. Not just tears, sobbing, deep, chest-heaving sobs. Don Bosco held him. Didn't say anything else, just held him while he cried. Carlo stayed at the oratory for 4 more years. He learned carpentry. He started praying. He started caring. He became one of the most dedicated helpers Don Bosco had, working with the younger boys, teaching them what he'd learned. He later joined the Salesian order and spent 30 years running an oratory in Genoa. He died in 1903 at age 54. Father Rua attended his funeral and wrote in his journal, "Carlo was saved because Don Bosco saw him standing on the edge and refused to let him fall." But not every story ended that way. In 1867, another man came to the oratory. Older, 38. His name was Giuseppe. He'd been a successful merchant, owned a shop near Piazza Castello, had a wife and 4 children. But his business had collapsed in 1865 during a financial crisis that hit Turin hard. He lost everything. The shop, the house, his savings. His wife left him and took the children back to her family in Alessandria. Giuseppe started drinking, not violently, just steadily, every night. He'd work odd jobs during the day, whatever he could find, and spend his wages on wine. He didn't cause trouble, didn't fight, didn't steal. He just slowly dissolved into alcohol and silence. His brother brought him to Don Bosco. The brother was desperate. He said Giuseppe wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat properly, wouldn't attend mass, wouldn't even admit he had a problem. He just drank until he passed out, woke up, worked, drank again. The brother said, "He's dying. Not from the wine, from giving up." Don Bosco agreed to meet with Giuseppe. The man came to the oratory on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He sat across from Don Bosco in the small office. Don Bosco asked him simple questions. "How are you feeling? What happened to your business? Do you want help?" Giuseppe answered in short, flat sentences. "I'm fine. The business failed. I don't need help." Don Bosco tried for an hour. Giuseppe never raised his voice, never got angry, never showed emotion. He just sat there, stone-faced, giving minimum responses. Finally, Don Bosco said, "You're not here because your brother dragged you. You're here because some small part of you still wants to live, but you're fighting it. You're fighting that part of yourself because giving up feels easier. And you're right, it is easier, until it's not." Giuseppe stood up. He said, "Thank you for your time, Father." and he left. Don Bosco never saw him again. He asked the brother to bring Giuseppe back. The brother tried. Giuseppe refused. Don Bosco sent letters. Giuseppe never responded. Don Bosco prayed for him, every day, for months. In October of 1867, Giuseppe's body was found in a rooming house near Porta Sousa. He died in his sleep, heart failure. He was 38 years old. Don Bosco heard about it 3 days later when the brother came to ask him to say a funeral mass. Don Bosco agreed. The mass was small, maybe 15 people. Giuseppe had no friends left, no family except his brother. The children didn't come, the wife didn't come, just his brother and a few people from the rooming house who felt obligated. Don Bosco preached. He didn't talk about Giuseppe's failures. He talked about the mercy of God. He talked about how even in the last second of life, a soul can turn to God. He talked about hope, but his voice was heavy, because he didn't know if Giuseppe had turned. He hadn't been there. He didn't know what happened in that final moment. 3 nights later, Don Bosco had a dream. He saw Giuseppe, and it was the same gray place. Giuseppe was standing there, and his face had the same expression as the man from Via Milano. Regret, desire, longing, but no hope. He looked at Don Bosco and said, "I thought I had more time. I thought one day I'd feel ready to try, but that day never came, and then there was no more time." Don Bosco woke up. Father Rua found him in the chapel at dawn, kneeling in front of the tabernacle, weeping. When Father Rua asked what happened, Don Bosco said, "Another one. Another soul who thought not choosing was safe, who thought he could wait, who thought giving up was neutral. But it's not. It's not neutral. It's a direction. And he went so far in that direction that he couldn't find his way back." Father Rua wrote it all down. He recorded the date, October 16th, 1867. He recorded Don Bosco's exact words. And he added a note at the bottom of the entry. Don Bosco has seen 3 souls now who were lost, not by choosing evil, but by choosing nothing. And each time he weeps more, because he knows they could have been saved if they just tried, if they just reached, if they just cared. Father Barberis recorded a conversation from 1873. A young man had come to confession. He was 19. He said he didn't commit big sins. He just didn't pray. Didn't go to Mass, didn't think about God, not from hatred, just from indifference. He asked if that was really so bad. Don Bosco looked at him and said, "Imagine your mother spends every day trying to reach you. She writes letters. She sends messages. She stands at the window watching for you. And you don't hate her, you just don't care enough to respond. Is that not a sin? Is that not breaking her heart? Well, God is doing the same thing. Every morning he reaches for you. Every night he waits, and you just shrug. That's not neutral. That's rejection. Soft rejection, silent rejection, but rejection all the same." The young man broke down. He confessed. He changed his life. He later became a Salesian priest and spent 40 years working with abandoned children in Argentina. But not everyone listened. Don Bosco saw more visions like the first one. Different men, different women, same problem. People who didn't choose evil, they just stopped choosing good. And in the space where good should have been, something else grew. Not demons, not fire, just absence. Cold, empty, forever. In 1877, Don Bosco gave a conference to his priests. Over 300 men attended. Father Rua transcribed it word for word. Don Bosco said, "The easiest way to lose your soul is to do nothing. Not nothing dramatic, just nothing. Stop praying, stop trying, stop caring. Tell yourself it doesn't matter. Tell yourself you're too tired. Tell yourself you'll start again tomorrow. And then tomorrow you say the same thing. And the next day, and the next. Until you've built a habit of absence so strong that when death comes, you can't break it. And then you meet God, and he offers you his hand, and you realize you've forgotten how to reach." He paused. Then he said something that Father Rua underlined 3 times in his notes. "Damnation is not God's punishment. It's your preference, perfected." That phrase spread through the Salesian order. It was repeated in homilies across northern Italy. It was written in spiritual manuals. It was carved into the wall of the chapel at Valdocco, where you can still see it today if you visit Turin. The Latin inscription reads, "Damnatio non poena Dei, sed electio tua perfecta." Don Bosco saw dozens of cases. Not all ended badly. Some men and women woke up in time. They came back. They started caring again. They chose effort over absence. And when they died, Don Bosco saw them again in his dreams, but this time in light, in peace, in joy. He told a story in 1880 about a man who'd stopped caring for 11 years. His wife brought him to Don Bosco when the man was 53. Don Bosco said, "You have a choice to make today, not tomorrow, today. Either you start trying or you admit you've given up. But don't lie to yourself that you're in the middle. There is no middle. You're either reaching or you're sinking." The man chose to reach. He went to confession for the first time in over a decade. He cried for 2 hours. He started praying again. He started talking to his wife again. He started being a father again. He died 6 years later, 1886. Don Bosco was at his bedside. The man squeezed Don Bosco's hand and said, "Thank you for not letting me lie to myself." Don Bosco saw him one more time 3 nights after the funeral. In the dream, the man was standing in a place full of light. He looked at Don Bosco and said, "It was worth it. Every hard day. Every choice to try again. It was worth it." But the first man, the one from 1862, Don Bosco never saw him in light. He saw him several more times over the years. Always the same, always in gray, always reaching, always too late. And every time, Don Bosco would wake up and spend the next day begging people to choose differently. In 1885, 3 years before his death, Don Bosco wrote a letter to one of his former students who'd become a parish priest in Milan. The letter is preserved in the Salesian archives. In it, Don Bosco said, "I am haunted by the souls of those who simply gave up. Not the dramatic sinners, not the rebels, but the ones who just stopped trying, stopped caring, stopped reaching. Because when I see them, they're not angry at God. They're angry at themselves. They finally understand what they threw away. They finally want it back. But the time for wanting is over. The only time that mattered was when they didn't want it. And they chose not to want it so many times that the choice became permanent." He continued, "Warn your people. Tell them that hell is not for those who tried and failed. It's for those who stopped trying. Tell them that the worst sin is not hatred or violence. It's indifference. Because hatred can be converted. Violence can be healed. But indifference is the choice to feel nothing, to want nothing, to be nothing. And if you choose to be nothing long enough, eventually you get your wish." Don Bosco died January 31st, 1888, at 4:45 in the morning. He was 72. He'd spent 50 years fighting for souls, most of them young, poor, abandoned. He'd built schools, orphanages, workshops, churches. He'd written over 100 books. He'd trained thousands of priests. But in his final hours, surrounded by his spiritual sons, he kept repeating one phrase. Father Rua recorded it. Don Bosco said, "Don't let them give up. Whatever you do, don't let them stop trying." He was canonized Easter Sunday, April the 1st, 1934, by Pope Pius XI. The ceremony took place in St. Peter's Basilica. Over 500,000 people attended. The canonization document listed hundreds of miracles, dozens of prophecies, countless conversions. But nowhere in the official documents is there a category for what Don Bosco saw most clearly: the slow death that comes from giving up, the quiet damnation that grows in the space where effort used to be. But the people who lived with him knew. Father Rua knew. Father Barberis knew. The thousands of boys who passed through the oratories knew. They'd heard the stories. They'd seen Don Bosco weep over souls who weren't even dead yet, souls who just stopped caring. And they remembered what he said in that conference in 1877. That damnation is not God's punishment. It's your preference, perfected. That hell is not fire. It's the absence of everything you suddenly realize you wanted, but spent your whole life pretending you didn't need. In 1973, a Salesian priest named Father Peter Stella was organizing the archives in Turin. He found a box of letters Don Bosco had received but never answered. Most were from families asking for prayers, but one letter stood out. It was dated April 18th, 1862, 5 days after the man from Via Milano died. The letter was from the man's daughter. She would have been around 10 years old. The handwriting was childish, uneven. She wrote, "Dear Father Bosco, my papa died. Mama says you tried to help him. I wanted to tell you that the night before he died, I heard him crying in the bedroom. I think he was sorry. I think he wanted to change, but he didn't know how. Please pray for him. Please don't give up on him. He gave up on himself, but please don't you give up on him too." The letter was never answered because Don Bosco received it the day after the funeral, and by then he'd already had the dream showing him where the man was. He kept the letter. He put it in the box. He never spoke of it publicly. But Father Stella found a small note attached to it in Don Bosco's handwriting. The note said, "I pray for him every day. I will pray for him until I die. Because even though I saw where he is, I also saw that he finally cared. And I have to believe that matters. I have to believe that his daughter's prayer and his final tears mean something. I have to believe that mercy reaches even there." Don Bosco prayed for that man for 26 more years, every single day. Father Rua confirmed it in his personal journals. Even on days when Don Bosco was too sick to get out of bed, too weak to say Mass, too exhausted to hear confessions, he still whispered a prayer for the man who gave up. Because Don Bosco understood something most people don't, that giving up isn't one moment. It's 1,000 small moments, 1,000 mornings where you choose not to care, 1,000 nights where you choose not to try. And those moments add up. They build a road. And that road has a destination. And the destination is a gray place where you finally realize what you lost, but can't go back to get it. In the Chapel of Mary Help of Christians in Turin, there's a painting commissioned in 1922 by the Salesian Order. It shows Don Bosco standing in a tenement room, his hand extended toward a man sitting on a bed. The man's face is blank, empty. But Don Bosco's face is full of anguish, not anger, not judgment, just desperate, pleading love. Underneath the painting, there's an inscription taken from Don Bosco's conference in 1877. It says in Latin, Facilis descensus, easy is the descent. Then in Italian, difficile est reditus, difficult is the return. Then in French, mais toujours possible, but always possible, always possible. That was Don Bosco's message. As long as you're breathing, as long as your heart is beating, as long as you have one moment of consciousness left, it's possible. You can choose to care again. You can choose to try again. You can choose to reach again, but you have to choose, because not choosing is still a choice. And if you choose not to care long enough, eventually that choice becomes who you are, and who you are becomes where you go. The man from Via Milano made his choice, every morning for 3 years, every night for 3 years. 1,000 small choices that built a road to a gray place where he finally wanted to turn back, but couldn't. And Don Bosco saw him there, and spent the rest of his life trying to make sure no one else ended up in the same place. Because hell isn't dramatic. It's not fire and demons and screaming. It's quieter than that. It's the absence of everything you suddenly realize you wanted but spent your whole life refusing. It's reaching for something that's no longer there. It's caring when caring is no longer enough. It's trying when the time for trying is over. In the Salesian archives in Rome, there's a file labeled Visions of Don Bosco. It contains Father Rua's transcriptions of 73 separate dreams or visions, spanning from 1844 to 1888. 41 of them involve souls in purgatory, 19 involve souls in heaven, 13 involve souls in hell. Of those 13, 9 are souls who committed what the Church calls mortal sins: murder, apostasy, sacrilege, serious, clear, definite choices against God. But 4 are different. 4 are souls who simply stopped caring, stopped trying, stopped reaching. They didn't choose evil. They just stopped choosing good. And in the absence of good, something else took root. Not evil, just nothing. And nothing, Don Bosco discovered, has its own kind of gravity. It pulls you down slowly, quietly, until you're so far down that you can't remember what up looked like. The file also contains a note from Father Rua, dated February 3rd, 1888, 3 days after Don Bosco's death. Father Rua wrote, "In his final moments, Don Bosco opened his eyes and looked at me. He said, 'Tell them not to give up. Tell them that giving up is the only unforgivable sin because it's the only sin that refuses forgiveness. Tell them that God will chase them to the edge of the earth and beyond. But if they choose to jump, he will let them. Because love requires freedom, and freedom requires the possibility of no.'" Those were his last clear words. 4 hours later, he was gone. They buried him in the Basilica of Mary Help of Christians in Turin. His tomb is black marble with gold lettering. Thousands visit every year. They pray for miracles. They ask for intercession. They bring their problems, their fears, their hopes. But in a small chapel to the left of the main altar, there's a kneeler that's worn smooth from decades of use. The brass plate on the kneeler is engraved with a single sentence: "For those who have given up." No name, no date, no explanation, and just that sentence. And every day someone kneels there. Someone who's tired. Someone who's given up. Someone who's chosen not to care so many times that they've forgotten how to care. And they kneel, and they try, and they reach. Because as long as you're breathing, it's not too late. As long as your heart is beating, you can still choose. As long as you're on this side of death, the road back is hard but possible. But the man from Via Milano ran out of time. He had 11 days. He used none of them. And when his heart stopped, the road closed. And Don Bosco saw him standing in gray, finally caring, finally trying, finally reaching. But there was nothing left to grab. In 2008, a team of historians from the University of Turin was researching mortality records from the 1860s. They were tracking cholera outbreaks, industrial accidents, infant mortality. One researcher found a death certificate dated April 8, 1862. Male, age 41. Occupation, textile worker. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Address, Via Milano, 4th floor. The researcher cross-referenced it with Don Bosco's archives. The dates matched, the address matched, the occupation matched. The man was real, his death was real. And if Father Rua's notes are accurate, Don Bosco's prediction 11 days earlier was real too. The researcher, Dr. Elena Moretti, published her findings in a paper titled Prophecy and Precision: Verifiable Predictions in the Life of Don Bosco. The paper notes 17 separate instances where Don Bosco predicted a death down to the day, and sacramental records confirm he was correct every single time. But Dr. Moretti added a footnote. She wrote, "What's remarkable is not that Don Bosco predicted these deaths. What's remarkable is that he tried so hard to prevent them. And what's tragic is that, in many cases, the person could have been saved, not from death, but from what came after. The man on Via Milano could have been saved. He had 11 days, He had a wife who begged him. He had children who needed him. He had a priest who risked his reputation to warn him. He had every chance. He just didn't care. And not caring became his choice, and his choice became his eternity.